Oui, bonjour. En fait, cette vidéo est juste avant la vidéo de worksheet de la semaine 7. Euh, Apparemment, j'avais pas le droit de mettre deux chansons dans ma vidéo, une chanson des Beatles, une chanson de Clash. Alors, cette vidéo-là, c'est juste pour vous dire que il y aura deux blancs. Je vais enlever les vidéos de la vidéo que j'avais faite avant. Et juste pour vous prévenir, si ça a l'air un peu bizarre. Du coup, la vidéo pour la semaine 7 va commencer après ça. Ça, non, c'est le début. Et je vais vous donner quand même en fait les liens pour les deux chansons, la chanson des Beatles et la chanson des Clash. Voilà, mais ça va pas être dans ma vidéo parce que apparemment voilà, c'est illégal. Voilà. Ok, bah merci et j'espère que vous aimez la vidéo quand même s'il y a assez de blanc. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Je voulais commencer par dire, j'espère que vous avez passé des bonnes vacances. Euh, pour l'expression écrite que vous m'avez rendue il y a peut-être un mois maintenant, j'ai là presque complètement fini. Je pense qu'il reste quelques-unes de ces expressions écrites. Pour vous dire aussi que j'étais pas très malade, mais j'avais Covid. J'avais été positif pour le Covid et maintenant je suis négatif. Du coup, c'est bien et je me sens beaucoup mieux. Mais voilà, donc c'est un peu pour ça aussi que j'ai mis du temps à finir. Mais je pense que j'ai répondu à tout le monde tout le monde qui m'a rendu cette expression écrite. Et pour vous dire aussi que l'examen maintenant va passer comme une espèce d'examen euh, terminal à la fin du semestre. Euh, on avait parlé de faire une espèce de mock, on va dire une espèce d'examen blanc, mais moi j'ai décidé de ne pas faire ça parce que vous me rendez quand même en fait des expressions écrites. Et voilà, du coup j'ai déjà eu l'occasion de vous rendre quelque chose. Euh, pour vous dire aussi que euh, à la fin c'était la semaine sur, euh, sur Blake, il y avait une expression écrite à la fin de ce worksheet. Et si c'est possible, je voudrais aussi que vous m'envoie ça comme expression écrite. Comme ça, je peux faire des corrections sur une deuxième expression écrite. Comme ça, je vais avoir au moins deux avant l'examen à la fin du semestre. Ok, du coup maintenant, je vais passer à session 7. Um, Today we are going to be looking at music in particular. So we've looked at poetry and we have looked at art, and today I would like us to look a bit at music. So to start, this was originally done as group work, but we're going to do both of them for you. So there's two songs here written in the 20th century. The first one is by the Beatles, and the song is called The Taxman in the album The Revolver, quite an important album for the Beatles, and one of their first major, you could say, political songs after their first period. The second, so this is written in 1966 by George Harrison. Most songs by the Beatles are written by Lennon. And so this is a kind of, we could say, one of the first ones that Harrison writes. So it's important also for that reason. The second song comes 13 years later, in 1979, is written by The Clash. It's a kind of punk rock band, very influential in the punk movement. The song is called London Calling. And again, a kind of political song about a slightly different era. So today we're going to look at these two songs. I'm going to play them in a moment. First exercise is I would like you to try and fill in these blanks with the answers, for the song, for the words that are given in the song, for the lyrics, les paroles, for the lyrics of each song. So there's this one by the Beatles, and this one by The Clash. Then I would like us to compare the two songs. So what is the general subject of The Taxman by the Beatles, the general subject of the London Calling song by The Clash? What vision of British society do they give? And would you describe this song as a protest song? So once you have filled in these blanks, I would like you then to try and fill in this table. The general subject, the vision of British society, and whether you would describe either song as a protest song. So does it protest against something in particular that's occurring in British society? Maybe just to give you some, just a quick bit of history. So Mr. Wilson was the Labour Socialist Prime Minister in Britain, and this song was written at I think when Wilson had just won, but Heath is the Conservative leader of the leader of the Conservative Party. So here you can see Labour Party and the Conservative Party. So now I will put these songs on. I'm just going to put them on from. You can see I can be looking up from here a bit. Okay, so you can hopefully now you can listen through that again, obviously bring it back, or even look it up on YouTube yourself to try and fill in these blanks. Maybe to try and give you just, as you've just heard that song, some background. So the criticism in a certain sense, and this will hopefully help you fill in this, is about tax, okay? And of course, the Beatles at this point were a successful band, so they were making quite a lot of money. And the idea was that there would be a larger progressive tax system placed into Britain, which meant that those who are earning more money would pay more money. Therefore, those that were poorer would not pay as much money. So which we call a progressive tax system. That is, you are taxed more depending on how much you earn. And so we can see that this is a political song of the Beatles complaining about them paying more tax because they'd become richer. So kind of interesting political song, if you will, maybe a protest of the rich more than anything else. Okay, I will now play the London Calling, which is by The Clash. There we go. So that is the end of the London Calling, The Clash. You can see that it may be slightly more abstract than the other one, which is clearly about tax. The Clash is talking about many different situations that are going on at that particular time. Maybe to give an indication to help. There was a lot of fear about kind of nuclear meltdowns and the problem of nuclear energy at this moment. So that might help you to decipher some of the things that are going on here. Also, this is not there, but I Live by the River line was about the fact that the Thames in London was flooding a lot. And so at that point, they had not built a barrier, a dam. It's called the London Barrier, I think, which stops the tide from coming in and flooding London. And also at this point, there were many more people in working class communities that were living by the river. Not so much these days, but this was certainly the case in the east of London. So this is, I mean, you could say, well, I'd like you to try and see what a lot of this is about, but also don't worry about maybe trying to look it up as well on the internet. And you can see here also a critique of Beatlemania, phony Beatlemania, phony meaning faux, meaning a kind of media created notion of Beatlemania. So a kind of critique of the Beatles here. Okay, so I would like you to try and write try and create this here. And then, so using this, I'd like you to just write something very small here. So using the following structures in your comparison, both either, neither, nor, or neither, nor. So both songs deal with a political situation. However, neither are dealing with I could say neither fall down on one side of the political spectrum, for example. So I'd like you to just, using this, write one sentence about the kind of doing a comparison. Both are, neither, or either are, or neither, nor. Okay. Okay, I will stop that there for the second before I go on to the written comparison. Okay, and of course, feel free to listen back to the songs as many times as you would like. Thank you. Hopefully this wasn't too difficult for you. We will now pass to the written comprehension section of this lesson, which again is about the Beatles and and the way that they were perceived by often students and the youth in the USSR, which is the Soviet Union, so Russia, but also including the other parts of the Soviet Union. It's a very interesting article, actually, and to a certain extent, maybe follows on from what this song could mean in terms of a kind of individualist economic protest against taxation. We can see, as I will read through, how the Soviets were very influential as a kind of almost form of propaganda, capitalist propaganda in the Soviet Union. Okay, so I'll read this out. So this is by Ed Viliami in The Guardian, written in 2013. So, for young Soviets, the Beatles were a first mutinous rip in the Iron Curtain. So the Iron Curtain was what described the kind of space between the West, understood as America and Western Europe, and the kind of the Soviet East. So that would be Russia and the other Eastern and some Central European countries. So countries such as Czechoslovakia, Poland, Ukraine, except Belarus, for example. And also down into, so you have Georgia as well, you have Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, these kind of countries that go down to the east of Turkey. in what we call Central Asia. Okay, so the band inspired dissidents and musicians, and a new book claims meant more to youth in the USSR than in the West. Crossing the famous Finland station in Leningrad one day in the early 1960s, Kolya Vasil was stopped by a policeman who had spotted his long hair. "You are not a Soviet man," charged the officer, and he grabbed my hair, recalls Vasil, who was then hauled across a platform while dozens of people laughed. I was crying from pain, but I had to keep silent. I was afraid the man would drag me off the prison. Vasil was a die-hard Beatles fan. The Beatles' music had given him, he said, all the adventures of my life, for which I was arrested many times, accused of breaching social order. They said anyone who listened to the Beatles was spreading Western propaganda. More than that, in the USSR, the Fab Four were like an integrity test. When everyone said anything against them, you knew what that person was worth. The authorities, our teachers, even our parents became idiots to us. Around this time in Britain, in 1962, a young Russian speaker from Yorkshire called Leslie Woodhead joined Granada TV in Manchester as a junior researcher, whose job included persuading local officials or champion knitters to appear on a programme called People and Places. One week, a show featuring a brass band needed a further item. This is supposed to be 1 week. Sorry. A show featuring a brass band needed a further item. "There are these kids making a lot of noise in a cellar in Liverpool," advised the fellow researcher. "They haven't made any records yet." Woodhead duly met them for a drink and shot the first film of them playing a lunchtime gig at the Cavern. But transmission was delayed because of a programme with the brass band's union fees. Instead, Woodhead urged his producers to allow the Beatles into Granada's studio and play on live TV for the first time. They sang "Love Me Do" and "Some Other Guy." 4 months later, they reached #1 with "Please, Please Do." Despite Woodhead's part in Beatles history, it was not the band's story in northwest England, where he still lives, but in the Soviet Union that became, Woodhead says, an essential narrative of my times, and that propels his effervescent new book, How the Beatles Rocked the Kremlin. This tells the remarkable story of precisely how and why, as Woodhead explains, the Beatles came to mean more and were more important to that generation of Soviet youth than they were here or in America for several reasons. The book's main character, the Russian writer and critic Art Troitsky, makes the claim that in the big bad West, they've had whole huge institutions that spent millions of dollars trying to undermine the Soviet system. And I'm sure the impact of all those stupid Cold War institutions had been much, much smaller than the impact of the Beatles. A grand assertion, maybe, but widely shared. Beatlemania washed away the foundations of Soviet society, explains Mikhail Safonov at the Institute of Russian History. And the Russian rocker Sasha Lipnitsky, snowflakes falling on his beret as he talks to Woodhead in a park bandstand, insists, "The Beatles brought us the idea of democracy. For many of us, it was the first hole in the Iron Curtain." Indeed, the repression and harassment of the music ebbed and flowed as the party controls lapsed or intensified. It went in waves. Sometimes you could be approved for an official recording, and sometimes you were banned, losing your job or education. It must have driven them insane, says Woodhead. He not only excavates the minds of the rebels, but also the propaganda machine at work. He recounts how a school staged a mock trial of the Beatles, broadcast on radio, with a prosecutor and denunciations in the manner of Stalin's show trials of the 1930s. A critical bulletin shown on state TV entitled Pop Quartet, The Beatles, told the story of how these gifted guys could be real cash earners while, struck down with psychosis, the fans don't hear anything anymore. Hysterics, screams, people fainting. So ran the TV commentary, accompanied by shots of dancing fans intercut with images of the Ku Klux Klan and dire poverty in the American South. Keep on dancing. Lads, don't look around, the programme taunted. You don't really want to know what's happening. Keep going, louder and faster. You don't care about anyone else. As Woodhead points out, to Beatle fans in 1970s Russia, everything West was good. The kids came to believe the exact opposite of everything they were being told all those years. Whatever the authorities said was terrible was bound to be wonderful. Moreover, Woodhead says, once people heard the Beatles' wonderful music, it didn't just fit. It just didn't fit. The authorities' prognosis didn't correspond to what they were listening to. The system was built on fear and lies, and in this way the Beatles put an end to the fear and exposed the lies. The more the state prosecuted the Beatles, concurs Mikhail Savinov, the more they exposed the falsehood and hypocrisy of Soviet ideology. The Beatles' imprint on even post-communist Russia is deep and enduring. A punk band called the Oz Belts A punk band called the Oz belts out working class hero and crippled inside. And Woodhead's story is woven through with the ironies of liberation from communism. At a deeper level, this is a book about all rock and roll, protest and pop, indeed, not just about the Beatles in Russia. At first, Soviet fans tried to cope as their homegrown but Beatles-inspired idols were tempted, argued Woodhead, by cooperation with the state. Only watch them try to assert themselves in a capitalist West that was entirely different to their work. Boris Grebenshchikov toured America, and he was a complete non-event there, says Woodhead, after which it took him years to recover this theme of his Soviet fans. But then, we in the West were completely unaware of this history. It doesn't help that a bunch of Soviets were singing in Russian that we think of as our music. But there's obviously a great deal of cultural arrogance on our part. More seriously was the eagerness with which capitalism devoured, and was devoured by Russian society. Woodhead describes Paul McCartney's concert in Kiev, sponsored by an oligarch's colossus, just as his famous performance in Red Square, Moscow, at which Vladimir Putin chatted with Makarovich of Time Machine, and had been promoted by Alpha Bank. Wasn't that a perfect 21st century deal between rock, money and politics, writes Woodhead. In Kiev, he sees crowds sheltered from a downpour under Coca-Cola umbrellas and girls on stilt hills flocking to hear McCartney via the shopping mall in pursuit of pink fripperies. Then, surrounded by heavy security guards, he reflects in our conversation. I found myself asking, is this the Russia these kids inherited from those utopian expectations? Well, yes it is. It opened the Pandora's box. I used to struggle against the cops, laments Koloyevasin. Now I struggle with these fools to do business. And worship the dollar. Then there was that realization that the West was not the opulent land of stretched limousines it was presumed to be. Some of Woodhead's cast know this. One even has a copy of Back in the DHSS by another Liverpool band, Half Man, Half Biscuit. Makarovich was surprised and appalled to find, upon finally making his pilgrimage to Merseyside, that we're so small and poor. We were and still are exponentially richer than they, said Woodhead. But when they did realise they were as fucked as they are, not until the end of communism. Why the Beatles? There is no hint of the Rolling Stones or the Who. Hello, so I just had a drink after that long article. Of course, you can read it several times and play back to hear things a bit clearer. And I think also maybe these questions will help with the comprehension. So, question one is, why did Kolya Vasin get in trouble with the police in his country? So this is in reference to the beginning of the article here. Number two, what was Leslie Woodward's role in the Beatles' rise to fame? So Leslie Woodward, it tells the history or the story about Woodward. I'm trying to see where it comes in for the first time. Yeah, around here. So we can see Woodward, Leslie Woodward. So to see what his role was in the Beatles' rise to fame. Number three is, what is the main claim of Leslie Woodward's new book? So Leslie Woodward is the author of the book called How the Beatles Rocked the Kremlin. And he tries to describe, through the whole article, well, it's not him describing, but the article describes the Beatles' effect, political effect in the Soviet Union. So what is his claim? And do other people agree with Woodhead's vision? So there is a line in the article where it talks about whether people agree with his argument. Number four. How did the Soviet authorities react to the Beatles' music and influence? So what about the people? So here is the reaction of the Beatles by the Soviet authorities, so the police and the government. And this is the reaction from the people. Of course, this is not the case for all people, because there are some people that are described of not necessarily agreeing with the Beatles as well. Okay, number five. How did the Beatles' music influence the Russian youth's vision of the West? So this is kind of, here we can see the difference between the youth maybe and say the parents. You can see that that is one of the answers. So how did the Beatles' music influence the Russian youth's vision of the West? And was this representation realistic? So here we start to talk about the notion of utopic ideas. So the Russian youth had an idea of the West via the Beatles, or the Beatles' influence. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, was this representation realistic? Was it true? Okay. So those are the five questions linked to the article. After that, there are some grammar, there are these grammar exercises. In the first one, so there are 8 sentences here, and I would like you to try to fill in these blanks with these. So a little, a few, many, too many, how many, much, too many, how, much, a lot, and so many. So I'd like you to fit those in. And the next one is the same, but with some, any, and no. So within these 8 sentences. And then the last piece of grammar is, I'd like you to réécrivez les phrases qui suivent en utilisant both, either, or neither. So I hate mustard and I hate vinegar. I hate mustard. I hate both. I hate both mustard and I hate vinegar. Just as an example. So I hate both mustard and vinegar. So I hate mustard and I hate vinegar. I hate both mustard and vinegar. And then this is a written expression. So once people heard the Beatles' wonderful music, it just didn't fit. The authorities' prognosis didn't correspond to what they were listening to. The system was built on fear and lies. And in this way, the Beatles put an end to the fear and exposed the lies. So I think this is quite an interesting question here. So in your opinion, should music remain a form of entertainment, or be used as a means of protest and rebellion? So not just is it used as a means of protest and rebellion, but should it? So it's a question of your opinion of whether music should be in something political, or something just for entertainment. Okay, thank you very much for listening this time. And if you've got any questions, as ever, don't hesitate to email. Thank you very much.